Officially live. Welcome. Um,
Hey.
so, would you mind telling us more about your background before we get into the questions?
Yeah, sure. My name is Josh Cowen, and my day job is I teach education policy at Michigan State University. I do some teaching of undergrads and graduate students. I'm by training a policy analyst, so spent most of my career asking questions like what works and for whom and why in education. But over the last few years, have gotten very vocal about one type of education policy that historically has been really bad for kids and families, and that has been school vouchers and efforts to defund public schools. Um, I speak about this issue all over the country. Last summer was given a very nice uh, award from the National Education Association called their Friend of Education for that work. Um, Embarrassed to say that previous winners were Dolly Parton and Quinta Brunson and folks like that over time. So, really see myself as trying to encourage uh, lawmakers and policymakers and journalists and others to really pay attention to the issue of education, especially as we talk about democracy and improving lives for kids and families.
That's great. Yeah. I have written several pieces about education myself as someone who's newly minted out of high school and junior in college. I've kind of seen how education in the 21st century actively as a student has gone. I've been in public and private schools, and it's I think that there's elements of both that have, um, broken elements, and I think the fact that private schools are much for at least the ones I went to, were much better experience for me and more educational. I think that's even a bigger sign that our system of education is broken because most people can't afford to go to private school.
Sure.
Um, so would you mind obviously, you mentioned vouchers. Would you mind quickly kind of explain, like, why those don't work? Because obviously we've seen states like Kentucky, really red states reject these
Yeah.
vouchers in recent years.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And why do you think that, Republicans still are latching on to this idea that even are popular with their own voters?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, it's actually one reason I wrote this book called The Privateers, which was published right before the election in 2024. And it actually set out to ask that question because vouchers. So, back up for a second. So, vouchers are taxpayer funds for private school tuition. And in today's modern political system, about half of states have a voucher type system. States use different ways to fund these things. You've heard everything from what are called education savings or education freedom accounts to just garden variety checks that states issue to private schools to fund families. There's different ways to do this, but a voucher is something that funds private school tuition with taxpayer dollars. And um, in the 1990s, these things started out as the result of technically bipartisan efforts in a couple of states, Wisconsin and Ohio, to fund alternatives to public schools within pretty distressed urban public school districts, so Milwaukee and Cleveland. These were signed and pushed by Republicans and by conservative philanthropy, including a couple that are very big players in right wing politics today, most notably a group called the Bradley Foundation, based in Milwaukee. But they were good, I think, good faith efforts to try to, while accomplishing some conservative political goals, also try to improve education. And uh, about 24 years ago, almost this spring, the U.S. Supreme Court blessed those efforts and said that there's not an inherent um, violation of the Constitution by using taxpayer funds to fund private schools that are religious, as long as there's no required religious teaching. That was 24 years ago, 2002. Since then, vouchers have sort of expanded in fits and starts in states across the country. But as they expanded, um, the early results from those trial programs that I just mentioned, which were favorable for the most part. I mean, there was some debate about it, but they weren't terrible. Um, since these things started expansion, first the voucher effect kind of became neutral. There wasn't really any impact at all. It just was diverting taxpayer dollars into something else. But at least it wasn't hurting kids. About a decade ago, as these things became statewide programs in Louisiana, in Indiana, in Ohio, and in Washington, D.C., which is the first and only federally funded full on voucher program, the results became horrific. And the reason for that is twofold. One, most voucher users are already in private school to begin with. About three-quarters were already in private school to begin with. So you mentioned you spent a little time in private school. My parents sent me to 3 years of private school at one point when I was a kid. Vouchers might have helped my parents, well, I was already in a private school, or your family, if you were already in private school, they tend not to do a lot to move kids from a public to a private school. About only one quarter, about 25% of voucher users were ever in public school to begin with. For that one quarter of kids, the schools they're able to get into, they're not like the elite private school academies that we see in the movies or that you hear sometimes in news reports. They're what I call subprime providers. Most of them ain't any good. Um, and or they don't have any academic mission. Their goal is to teach church teachings to children, for example. And again, that has been allowed increasingly by the current Supreme Court that we're in right now, which has made additional rulings since then. So when I say they don't work, they don't improve academic outcomes. And increasingly over the last 4 or 5 years, they've been part of this broader culture war fight that Republicans are using to really kind of undermine investments in opportunity for folks across the board, not just in education.
Great, yeah. I think that oftentimes vouchers are explained by certain people to be like, as like they try to simplify it, and it's really sometimes it makes it harder to understand why someone would be against it. But then when you really get into the meat and potatoes of vouchers and what they've come to mean in terms of what we've seen, like you just explained, they're quite problematic. Um, Going further into the issues with our education system, what do you think, in addition to the vouchers issue, has kind of led to the breaking down element of our education system, and how do we fix it? I know we've seen people like Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania kind of push. He just signed a law that was bipartisan to require bringing cursive back into the education system, and he's pushing to get cell phones banned, which is a countrywide effort, along with bringing back required recess for students. But like, what do you think is broken? How do you think we fix it? And yeah.
Well, I appreciate the question, and I would welcome your thoughts on that. I mean, the thing that I have been saying, and I've been doing this for about 4 years, like talking actively and saying these vouchers things aren't working, they're undermining good faith efforts to improve public schools. But that starts from the premise that you just raised, which I also share, that we do have to improve public schools in general. Parents are asking this for this. A lot of educators are asking for this. Um, and the other side on this question, the sort of right wing political organizing that has been pushing vouchers and a handful of billionaires behind them, they're getting traction not just because they have billionaire backing, but also because they're finding some fertile ground for the message that we do need to make some improvements. Unfortunately, and this is where the Democrats come into the conversation. You know, over the last 5, 6 years, Democrats have completely lost the the polling edge, is from what polling says, in terms of sort of trust on public schools. And depending on who you believe, if you believe Betsy DeVos, for example, the reason for that is to do with bathrooms and certain books and business like that. I don't take that view, but I do take the view that, and this is also confirmed. I'm at the end of the day a researcher. So researchers studying political candidates have shown that Democratic candidates since 2020 have basically stopped talking about education. And that's not like literally true, right? But just as a function of the percentage of issue areas that they do talk about, it's become like a top 10, top 12 issue for Democrats. It's like a top 3 issue for Republicans. And I don't think that their ideas are good. Like those voucher schemes I just said hurt
But
kids
they
and
talk about
families.
it. But they
But they
talk
talk
about
about
it.
it. Yes. And in American politics, that matters. So I think we should have.
The whole race in Virginia in 2021 was about this fake idea of this, like, CRT, critical race
You're right.
theory nonsense that and that won the reason you would think that that would have gotten Democrats to maybe wake up about talking about education in a more serious way, but it didn't really materialize, at least.
So you would have been in what, like 6th grade or something when COVID hit?
No, I was,
7th grade?
no, I was, I had just started high school.
Okay.
I was in midway through ninth grade.
But you were in K-12, so this is the other issue that Republicans bring up a lot is the COVID school closures, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think we need to bring a lot more young people to the conversation. I would counter with a lot of the distrust among young people is uh, you and I are several years apart age-wise, but unfortunately, we're both. I'm at the front end. You're at the tail end of what's known as the school shooting generation. You know, these things started in the early 90s when I was in high school, and they are still going on. So there's like a lot of structural things. It's not just COVID. We should take seriously what happened during COVID, but people are upset at the sort of a lot of different things that I think public schools are bearing the weight of. And um, I do think that all of those conversations need to be had as we're talking about this, because otherwise what's going to happen is the conservative sort of right wing political forces are just going to try to privatize everything, like we've seen with Doge, like we've seen with Medicare and Medicaid, um, and public schools are getting wrapped into that.
Yeah, I think that the things I've talked about on my Substack and kind of experienced is I really like the idea to bring recess back, 'cause I think that kids need a time specifically because of I think a lot of students and a lot obviously parents do too, but a lot of students fear the whole idea of a school shooting or something like that happening, and kind of having a time where they can just be kids and relax and kind of just be active. I think that, is extremely helpful. I think that and so it's not like you have to be doing this like you have in, like, gym or something. It's like you can do whatever you want, play kickball, just even just talk with
Doing
friends,
something
but, like,
physical,
it
sure.
allows and I think it would actually cut down on people talking as much in class because they wouldn't they have all this energy, and they have no time to actually, like, let it out because they're in school all day, and that's good, but, you also need to make sure that they have an outlet for that, that's healthy, and that would be recess. I think that bringing back the
Yep.
arts and humanities in our school is also important. I think that, a lot of schools allow, like, taking music, art, all those different things as, like, an elective that you can choose to take if you want to, but I know it used to be where, like, that was just part of your schedule in the day, and I think that that also allows people to im kind of understand more what's going on, and I think that also you've seen books like, people might read, like, an abridged version of a book that's, like, a well-known book, and people are just reading less, or they're reading it on, like, and this also is a funding issue. A
Okay.
lot of our schools are not funded well. Um, this is partially because local governments are reluctant to raise local taxes because of the stigma around taxes in general. But those are the ones that fund local infrastructure and, of course, our education system in addition to federal funds that come in.
You got it.
But I think those are the main things that I would change that made my, K through 6 experience, which was private school, a much better educational experience and a much more and I learned a lot more despite having less time in my classes, but I was doing more and, like, having all these different other, opportunities. When I switched to an online school a few months before COVID started, I was told that I had to catch up on 3 months of school like, over, like no, it was, like, over 6 months of school work, like, in terms of so I did not learn in, like, the month between when I left, my public school and when I had joined this private, online school. And I was like, 6 months? That's a lot. Like, and it was not pushing I don't blame the teachers at all. I think that they're dealing with a standardized curriculum that's being required. They have to teach the test, they have to do all these other things required by the districts, required by the administrations, which are somewhat required by the state and then the federal level also to get funds. And they kind of stuck kind of also being babysitter because the economy makes it so parents have to work both have to work, and then they can't help their kids with homework or help with, like, various different things, so I think those are all the issues that we're currently dealing with,
Sure.
that I think need to be fixed. The and I know that's a lot of things, but, like, I also don't think that they get connected much, and I don't think Democrats are talking about it enough. But speaking of Democrats, my question to you is, do you see any Democrats that are talking about this either in 2026, 2028, that you would that you think, especially for 2028, that you would consider like one of your top picks for
Well,
2028?
I don't have a roster of presidential candidates right now, but I will name a few that I think are doing some interesting and important stuff. So one closest to home is the governor of my state, Governor Whitmer. So she's term limited out, so she's only got a few months left in her term, but she's made literacy top priority for her over the the time she has left in office. She's obviously a fairly high profile national figure in this, so folks are paying attention. She's doing some really clever things. Just specifically in the literacy space, because Michigan needs to improve in the way we address literacy, specifically for uh, kids who have had difficulty reading, and for kids who are working through dyslexia, for example. I think some really important investments that this governor is making. She's getting, by the way, a lot of a sort of attack on the right from this sort of thing for doing the things that they're asking to do. It's just that they don't want to give Democrats that issue. Other folks, Governor Bashir, of course, in Kentucky, who's been a real leader in this. I was grateful to do a press conference with Governor Bashir right before the election in 24 to try to stop vouchers in their state. And in fact, and you mentioned this, voters rejected it on election day while electing Trump. Rural voters didn't see any benefit to them from these voucher systems because there aren't any private schools in these rural communities. So, but Bashir's doing a lot of other proactive things too, in addition to stopping vouchers, is pushing through pre-K for all in his state, which is what our governor is also invested in. Doubled the number in my state of kids in preschool over the last 4 years because of those efforts. Well, I guess he's not governor. He's running for governor. Hope he's the next governor. Rob Sand in Iowa has been talking a lot about investing in schools. James Tallarico, who,
Yes.
he's probably the most heavily covered candidate right now in the cycle, this cycle, got his start fighting for public schools in Texas and on his stump speech. I've been
Yeah.
grateful to have worked a little with Tallarico in the past on the voucher stuff in Texas. His stump speech right now, number two issue is making sure everybody has a good public school. Governor Spanberger in Virginia. So that you could go on and on for a handful of
Yeah.
folks, but I would just say that they're um, I don't have listen, everybody loves to beat up on DC consultants, but I do think that if you think about what the kind of advice Democrats are getting from DC is very different than what you see in the states from these folks who are out there living and working in the field, and those include some of the names that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I would agree because I think that oftentimes prior to all these voucher referendums being voted down, usually in like wide percentage, like wide margins, a lot of these states, prior to those happening, if you ask a GC consultant whether or not a margin thing would like pass in various different states, even in a purple state, I think they would tell you that they probably would pass, and why fight it? Like, we're against them, but we're not going to like, they would they would say like, "Well, they're pretty popular, so, like, why fight it?" But the thing is, the vouchers are w I didn't even know this about how unpopular they were even in red states. That's obviously
Yeah,
good, but it's not what you hear in the discourse. I think that
that's right.
have you seen Democrats since 2024, since 2020, like, in recent years, talk about education in a different way, a better way?
Well, one view of the problem is that Democrats just need to sound more like Republicans. And that means more vouchers or more or beat up on labor unions or that kind of thing. You really can't go wrong. Speaking of which, uh, assigning too much of the underlying motivation for stuff like vouchers and other types of attacks on public schools on the right is just some labor bashing. I mean, like that's just what a lot of this comes down to. But that's true across the board, not just in education, right? And so this idea that we need to sound more like Republicans among progressives is not it's not limited to education. How many times do you hear this? I do think that there's been an effort made to uh, try to find areas of compromise. And one of those is, where can there be improvements? I think if listen, like a lot of folks, uh, the way that they encounter government is actually through education. Like for a lot of people on a daily basis, government is registering your vehicle at the in my state it's called the Secretary of State's office, the DMV, whatever. It's interacting if you've been a veteran with the VA. Uh, it's your public school, and there's these big abstract issues, and there's this local connection to government. And so to the extent that there's this larger pushback to government, and we've seen this during the Trump era, public schools have gotten caught up in that. But I would just say that, at the end of the day, like most parents want, and Talarico talks about this, like most parents want a school. The data show this in my line of work. The data show most parents actually want a decent school that is near their house. They don't want to travel
Yeah.
20 miles to get a decent school. So the school choice stuff may work for a handful of people, and we may need to provide a handful of opportunities for kids who need, say, extra supports to do those things. But most people want to go to school near where their kids live, especially if they have young children. Most people want the school to be able to work with those children on reading, whatever their reading needs are. That's something Democrats got to get better at talking about. So there's a lot of different pieces here, but I think you start from the premise that like most people actually want some of the same stuff, which is a good, high functioning public school in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of people just talking about it in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that 'cause I think that, like, people view I think to some extent, both parties, but more so the Democratic Party is, like, the party of, like, kind of supporting No Child Left Behind and like, state testing and, like, these things that would not are have either people either view as bad for education or have come out to be more bad for education. But I would say that one of the people I like watching whenever she puts out a reel is, I don't know what her actual name is, but her handle is unlearn16. She's, like, a Canadian, I believe she's Canadian, v she makes a lot of videos in Canada, and she's a teacher herself, I think in high school, um, and she's constantly talking about education, politics, and all of this stuff, so I like listening to her. Um, I've one more policy question, I think whenever I put out a post about education, I hear from liberals and conservatives about, like, anger about the unions, as you mentioned, but not as much the unions themselves, but the leadership of said unions. Is there Do you think that the leadership of the teachers' unions are necessarily doing the best they can do to fight for these changes in the education system rather than just, like, prioritizing, as they should, better, treatment for the teachers, but also fighting for these changes in education that we've been talking about today?
I can only speak from my own experience, and I do a lot of work in the space. I mentioned that I've been on stage many times in many public settings with the NEA leadership, with the AFT leadership. It's no secret. I know Randy Weingarten. I've been on many stages with her in many press conferences. So I have not found the union membership to be at all difficult to speak with. They understand the need to improve schools. They understand the need to keep moving forward with positive ideas. It's not necessarily the same thing as saying every local agrees with that. It's almost the opposite problem than what you asked about. Not every local is going to go along in every district with everything that states want to do, which is where the problem comes in. I also think a lot of what gets uh, blamed on the teachers unions is actually the result of organizing across public school advocacy communities, including school district leadership, school superintendents, school board associations. In a lot of those states where vouchers have been on the table, for example, labor national labor groups have been participatory. I don't want to discount their efforts, but it's really been the school board associations and the superintendents associations that have helped fight vouchers, for example. 'Cause there aren't very many labor unions, teachers unions in the South, for example, where a lot of these vouchers have passed. So they have a footprint as a professional organization, but they're not at the bargaining table. And to your point, like, what do you expect? Like, a lot of these organizations are standing up for their communities. I cannot tell you how many legislators on the Republican side that have talked to me over the years and said that the reason they opposed vouchers is their school superintendent told them that it was going to hurt their district. And in a lot of these rural Republican districts, the public school system is the biggest employer, for example. Like in the superintendent's like a CEO of the biggest job creator in your district. So a lot of these state legislators say, I can't go against my golfing buddy who's the superintendent, but he's the largest employer in my district. I'm not saying that the unions in every instance have gotten everything right. No organization does. But I do think that there's been some strategic. I mean, listen, and I write about this in my book. There's three sets of billionaires that have been pushing vouchers as an example, like over time. One are the Betsy DeVos folks, the Christian nationalists. The second is sort of Charles Koch and these kind of libertarian sort of oil and gas industry billionaires. And the third is newer, and that's the tech bro billionaires. It's like Jeff Yass, TikTok billionaire, and Elon Musk himself. Well, they don't, apart from being billionaires, they don't actually have a ton in common. They want vouchers for very different things. But the thing, like Betsy DeVos really is obsessed with bathrooms and all kinds of culture war stuff. The Koch people don't care about that. They really don't. But they do care about shrinking what they call the footprint of government. And the thing that links like Betsy DeVos and Charles Koch on the voucher issue is not culture wars. It's deep hostility to labor unions. And so you don't have to be, a genius or a conspiracy theorist in either direction. Some of this is about weakening public sector unions in general, not just in education, but in general. And so we do have to name that. And that's where a lot of the personal attacks on the Randys of the world and others come from. It's just simply these guys are trying to weaken a very what they see as a roadblock to the things they want to do in this country. And we're seeing, by the way, labor union membership is up over the last year since Trump took over, as the Trump administration has attacked public sector employees, as people have lost their jobs.
Going after
Um,
the Department of Education.
going up to the Department of Ed, but also firing a bunch of government workers, right, who were unionized in the federal government. So I think we're kind of seeing this swinging back and forth, and this is going to be part of the story. This is also true in Europe too, by the way. It's not just here in the U.S.
So this is like more of a Substack special question, I guess you could say. Are there any other like who do you like? I know I read you talk about when I'm thinking about education policy and like education issues. Who do you typically look at to get your information so we can kind of like
Sure.
spotlight other people that are doing
Sure.
this? Amazing
Well, I
work?
would encourage folks to read and watch Jess Piper, for example. She's got a big Substack that based in the Heartland in the Missouri area. I believe she's called View from the Rural America or something like that is the name of it. Sari Rosenberg has a Substack called Yo Miss that's really helpful. Sari's all over the place in social media. Um, and they're more sort of from the former teacher community. There are, like a lot of the people you all read too. I read the Bulwark, kind of on the conservative side. I read the couple of the Pod Save Bros, people like that. I think we all sort of look at some of that stuff. So there are people out there, especially on the education space, like the Sari and Jess are a good start. There's a few others that are not necessarily coming to me, but I'm reminded, I need to make some of those recommendations in my own. So, it's a good question.
Yeah, so I appreciate you obviously coming on. I know that you have to go soon. But I thought that I'm happy you were able to join us. I'm
Sure.
sure that this issue will be explored a lot more by a lot of other people. Hopefully by more presidential candidates, and it gets obviously in 2026 also. I hope that as you're seeing the debate around phones in schools seeming to become a national issue, maybe that forces us to really consider more educational issues,
I
and
hope
that
so.
becomes a bigger issue. Um, and I guess the last thing I'll say to you is keep up keep up this amazing work, and pushing both Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all across the spectrum, South, North, East, West, to reject vouchers and to improve the education system.
Thanks for your work. I always like to see young people out there engaging in this space. So it's important stuff, and keep up the good work. We'll talk soon.
Yes. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Bye. So yeah, thank you guys for joining. I will be posting this in the coming as soon as I get the recording, I will be sharing it. But thank you for joining, and I encourage you to subscribe to both Josh and myself. I have free and paid subscriptions. Free and paid subscriptions get the same content, but is a way for you to support my work. Um, I have monthly subscriptions that are $8 a month, and yearly subscriptions are $80 a month. Oh, sorry, $80 a year. Um, and I would really appreciate however you can support this community, whether it's free or paid. Please just join. We need as many people to join this movement as possible. We're in a midterm year. We need people to be joining. Join the resistance. And don't forget to check when your primary is and look up your candidates. This is a very important year. We need to fight back against Trump and MAGA, and also define the Democratic Party in a much better, clearer stance. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Have a great day.